Good morning, my name is Gabriel Grego. I'm the managing partner of Quintessential Capital Management. We're a short activist fund, and we're here to present you our latest short activist presentation. Please read the disclaimer carefully. Okay, what is Quintessential? We do only three things. We basically identify, investigate, and expose cases of catastrophic corporate situations, for example, accounting fraud or illegal behavior on behalf of the management of a public company. We investigate it through very deep due diligence, and finally, we exposed the situation to the market and to the public by surprise using a pure activist approach. And this is what we're doing today, for example. We have a very strong track record. These are the 8 cases in the past that we have exposed as activist short transactions. On average, we have an 85% price impact every time we select a target in the public market. And this is a selection. But here we came to talk about Penumbra. Penumbra is the latest target, and it's a medical device company. The title of the presentation will be Penumbra and its Killer Catheter: A Tale of Greed, Deception, and Disregard for Patients' Lives. Summary on the presentation. Our own opinion on Penumbra. We think this company is doomed by its own corporate greed. Our opinion is based on very strong evidence. We believe that the flagship device of Penumbra, the Jet 7 Extra Flex, is linked to 18 deaths and 39 injuries, which the company has full legal liability for, in our opinion. This device has critical structural flaws that make it unsafe and unmarketable, and we believe an FDA recall may be imminent. Penumbra has been highly misleading in critical parts of communication, especially with doctors and with investors, particularly with respect to the Jet 7 Extra Flex. Reflects on quality issue that seems to be happening also in different parts of the company, unrelated to the Jet 7. Our sources claim that elite US hospitals, including in Mayo Clinic, Mount Sinai, and Stanford, are discouraging the use of the device, or in some cases they made moratorium on the use altogether. Despite appearances and a pretty good late quarter, we believe that the financial metrics of the company are rapidly deteriorating. They're showing very bad earnings quality, and they may be anticipating what we believe could be a collapse in sales. Finally, there have been key staff resignations, and the CEO seems very busy selling shares ever since the beginning of this identified crisis. In short, Penumbra could be doomed by a likely recall of its flagship device and a possible product liability lawsuit for the losses. Methodology consistent in a very broad range of activities, especially dozens of interviews with neurosurgeons, former FDA consultants, competitors, engineers, a physical examination of the Jet 7 device, which we managed to get our hands on a model, due diligence on public FDA filings and public database filings, background checks on the people involved, and finally a financial and strategic analysis of the company. Let's start with what's good about this company. It should be recognized that until recently, the company was a pioneer in a very important clinical area, the aspiration thrombectomies, and the company produced for many years good products, which probably saved many people's lives. So this is Penumbra in a nutshell. It's approximately 10 billion market cap in the healthcare medical device industry. They focus on the treatment of ischemic stroke and also on certain peripheral vascular activities. Sales are about $500 million. The company is not a member of AdvaMed. AdvaMed is an association that basically gathers all medical device manufacturers and, among other things, regulates code of ethics and similar behavior. And strangely, the only one among the competitors that we review, Penumbra, is not a member. Their main product lines are the neuro, which is mostly the treatment of stroke, and vascular, which is treatment of blood clots elsewhere in the body, to make a simplification. The two are split pretty much 50-50. The focus on the presentation, however, is going to be what we said before, the Penumbra Jet 7 system, which is a specific model, probably their flagship product in the neuro division, for the treatment of ischemic stroke. It has a number of components. And according to sell-side research we reviewed, this system accounts, this segment of the company accounts for 41% of total revenue. So it's a very important part. The Jet 7 is a device to perform a thrombectomy through an aspiration catheter. What is a thrombectomy? Essentially, strokes are usually caused by blood clots somewhere in an artery inside the brain. These blood clots prevent the blood from flowing. And the idea is to insert a catheter, usually in the leg. The catheter goes all the way up deep inside the brain, identifies the location of the blood clot, and removes it. Now, what is special is that if before it was done very often by scraping the artery with little pieces of metal, the aspiration thrombectomy allows you to do the same thing through the application of suction. So essentially, the catheter reaches the blood clot and sucks it out of the body. It's a revolutionary technique which now has been established for many years, and it has to be recognized that Penumbra has been the leading actor in this category. So they had some early success, and for a long time they had the market all for themselves. They had pretty much 100% of market share. And this allowed them to grow very rapidly and to be a strong success even in the stock market with very strong price appreciation since their recent 2015 IPO. But the problem starts in 2018 when competing devices all of a sudden starts getting put in the market. And obviously, anytime there is a high growth area, it becomes attractive to other players as well. And the big problem came specifically when Microvention, which is a Japanese manufacturer, came out with the Sophia catheter, which is a competing device to Penumbra Jet 7. And according to all the doctors we spoke with, it's a game changer. It's a much better device. It allows for much greater flexibility and navigability, and usually allows for a lot faster surgeries than with the prior version of the Jet 7 of Penumbra. So surgery can be as short as 10 minutes rather than 3/4 of an hour. Now, this is the Microvention product, but even Medtronic, Stryker, Boston Scientific, all of those also came up with their competing aspiration catheter products as well recently. And obviously, this created a problem because this company started taking market share from Penumbra that we estimate that at the beginning Penumbra had the market all for itself, 100%, and we estimated right now that market share in Euro is slightly less than 60%. So they lost a significant amount of market share to these new players coming in. Now, why would the problem be very worrying to Penumbra's management? Basically, Penumbra is a very small company, relatively speaking, to all the giants which have now started to compete with it. And you see, on this chart, you can see the R&D budget of the various players. Some of these have multi-billion-dollar R&D budgets versus Penumbra, which is only spending some $60 million a year in R&D. So it's very hard to compete with giants of that magnitude, especially when you're dealing with products which are in some way becoming quickly commoditized, like a simple catheter. So the management was wondering what to do, and the most obvious thing to do was to take the original Jet 7 device and to change it in a way that could make it more competitive vis-a-vis the competition, especially vis-a-vis the Microvention Sophia catheter. How did they do it? Essentially, they took it and they made some engineering changes which made it more flexible. And according to the doctor that we spoke, many of them welcomed the product, and they said that it probably reached parity with the Sophia in terms of flexibility and navigability. So from this point of view, they were successful. It is important to say that the product was not approved like any other new product would be approved, going through extensive clinical studies, for example, but it took advantage of the FDA 510K fast track clearance procedure, which essentially is a very fast way to reach the market in a matter of weeks or months, rather than the years it takes for full clinical studies. And we'll see exactly how that works, but the idea is the company must make a claim that the new device is just a slightly different iteration of the old device, and for all practical purposes is similar or substantially equivalent to the predicate. Now the bad. The earthquake started in June 2020 when Hirata, which is Penumbra's distributor in Japan, warned hospitals with a letter to all the hospitals and neurosurgeons which were using the device to be careful because there is a record of already 11 deaths, 8 deaths in the United States and 3 in Japan, of people that were using the device. The letter mentioned damage to the inner layer of the catheter, and also specifically the catheter expanding like a balloon, damaging the patient's blood vessel. So basically they said to the doctors, be careful because this thing can happen. And shortly afterwards, the device was taken off the Japanese market, and to our knowledge, it is still off right now, and many months after that. So this is the first signs of trouble. What exactly is going on? What does this letter mean? Well, the Jet 7 extra flex is malfunctioning, so the new edition of the Jet 7. It seems that Penumbra altered the design of the original Jet 7 in order to make it more competitive with the peer. It increased the flexibility and navigability of the design, but seemingly at the expense of structural integrity. The device seems prone to malfunction, and sometimes this malfunction can have catastrophic consequences such as death. This is a photograph we obtained from a research paper of exactly what the letter was talking about. You see, that's the distal tip of the catheter, which expands just like a balloon. And obviously, that's not supposed to happen. The device breaks and expands like a balloon. And typically, this happens when you're injecting contrast medium inside. The size of the expansion is several times the diameter, and it's several times the diameter of the blood vessel that the catheter is supposed to be in. So when that happens, essentially the artery inside the brain ruptures and kills the patient. These are additional photographs that we obtained speaking to doctors, and a lot of these photographs are now going around the medical community. On the left, you see the ballooning device, and on the right, we asked an artist to make a representation of what this kind of event could look like in a patient blood vessel. And of course, as we said before, the balloon expands and destroys the artery inside the brain, and almost always this is fatal, and unfortunately, the patient ends up dying. This is another type of malfunction. So sometimes it does not balloon, but still the same area, instead of ballooning, it simply breaks, and sometimes it just detaches itself and goes traveling around the artery. Now, this kind of incident is not necessarily lethal, but it can cause injury, and it takes some time to recover. This kind of breaking we call it the breaking of the distal tip, and that is the term which is used in the official FDA database, has happened many times. Some are more than 200 times. It's difficult to know the exact number because there are some duplicates in the database. But in any case, it breaks and it makes the surgery more difficult. This happened a lot of times in the last year. And it's important to say that it happens always in the same spot. So this kind of suggests that there is a structural problem with the device. We managed to speak to a doctor who essentially had a functioning sample of the Jet 7, and he caused the Jet 7 to essentially fail just by a simple injection, and he did it in front of the camera. You can see here, by injecting a little bit of saline solution, obviously this was done outside of the patient's body. And you can see in the video what happens. The solution is injected, and the device expands just like a balloon. Obviously, if this had happened inside a patient's brain artery, death would have been a very likely outcome, unfortunately. Why is this problem important? Well, presence of fractures, exposed coils, and ballooning suggests a systematic structural integrity issue with the device. So it's not just a bad batch. This is probably a design flaw. All the surgeons we questioned, they say that, we assume that injecting anything through a catheter is safe, because that's what a catheter is for. It's in the very definition of the catheter, something that you can inject a biological fluid inside, or a contrast media. Some 20% of the neurosurgeon, according to many people's opinion, they use aspiration catheter injection of contrast media on a routine basis. And many others say that it's important to retain the possibility to do it if certain complications occur during the surgery. Very important also, maybe with one possible exception, there haven't been any deaths associated with competing devices during the same time period. So the Jet 7 is responsible for some 15 deaths in the United States and 3 in Japan. The exact number, again, it's difficult to calculate because of the problems on the mode database, but that's a right order of magnitude. But in the same period, competing devices either didn't kill anyone, or maybe there was only one patient's death, which in our opinion could have been ascribed to a procedural issue. So the device appears to be defective and unsafe. These are screenshots from the official FDA mode database that the doctors and the company are supposed to make an accident report every time something happens. And you see that since the Jet 7 device was introduced in July 2019, the database has a record of 18 people deaths. Now, some of those are duplicates. We believe the actual number in the United States is probably 15, but it's still a very, very large numbers. And you see, if you actually check out the accident report, you'll see that they're very similar to each other, and almost all of them, or all of them, mention the ballooning of the catheter that you saw before. This is one example, but they all look alike, and this is taken straight from the FDA database. The description of the event says, quote, "During the procedure, the physician injected contrast through the Jet 7, and the artery ruptured. Subsequently, the patient expired." I showed you one of them, but they all look like this. These are the injuries. So the FDA database shows 39 records of injuries due to the Jet 7 device within the time frame that the device was introduced to the market. Most injuries, again, they're all very similar to one another, and they involve the breaking of the distal tip of the device, again suggesting a structural issue. And these are the close calls. So the database lists 224 malfunctions since July 2019. And again, all of these malfunctions, which thank God did not result in any injuries or death, but almost all of them involved the distal tip of the device. How could this happen? How could a situation like this come into place? Well, our reconstruction of the dynamics is that the company, when they were trying to improve the device, they faced a trade-off between flexibility and structural integrity. So any catheter, obviously the thinner you make it, it will be more flexible, but it will also be weaker and less able to withstand pressures or friction or any other force. And what we think happened here is that Penumbra was in a hurry to come up with a competing device to the Sophia, and they probably went too much on the aggressive side in the flexibility, and they didn't do sufficient testing on the device. For example, probably, based on what we see, they did not test adequately for what happens when you increase the fluid pressure, for example, because you're injecting contrast fluid. And as a result, unfortunately, a dangerous device was put on the market. How was this thing approved by the FDA? Well, again, the FDA approved it through the 510(k) fast track clearance process, which is a much easier way to get approval and much faster. And the FDA, we assume they probably trusted the information that was given to it by Penumbra. And it's important to say that the two criteria for granting the substantial equivalent, which is necessary for the approval, is number one, either the product doesn't have different characteristics from the old one, or if the characteristics are different, for example, if the XtraFlex has a different technology than the old one, the company must show that the changes are not going to impact the safety profile of the device. So they're not changes which are likely to result in problems with the patients. And you can see here in this screenshot from part of the application, this is public documents that we got on the internet, that Penumbra did on the FDA to approve the Jet 7. So the Jet 7 device is compared to the former Jet 7, the one not with the XtraFlex technology. And you can see in the graph that basically all of the characteristics are the same except for the coating and the extrusion, especially the material used in the extrusion, which before it was polyurethane. What does it mean? The extrusion process is an engineering way to give a catheter its shape. It basically determines a lot of its physical characteristic. It says they're equivalent, so Penumbra says that whatever changes they did in the extrusion, they made it equivalent, but clearly we believe it did impact the safety profile since people started being injured and dying after those changes were made. Here's an article that we found on a specialized scientific magazine that explicitly says that the extrusion process is very important and small variation can lead to large differences in the performance of the device. So we believe that the product is not substantially equivalent with whatever was before because Penumbra likely changed some engineering, for example, the extrusion, which clearly had some impact on the health of the patient that use it. These are some opinions, for example, from a senior surgeon at Mount Sinai, quote, "I don't see how you can morally or medically use this product, the XtraFlex, anymore." They're saying that after all these deaths and injuries, it's very probably dangerous to use it because you risk a lawsuit and morally because you risk to kill the patient if anything goes wrong. Now the ugly. So any company can have maybe bad luck, or maybe they rush a little bit to the market and put in a bad device, but at least they have a responsibility to take it off the market voluntarily the moment that they have preponderance of evidence that the device is dangerous, and at least to communicate with transparency to doctors and to investors what is the real situation. You will see now that we have very strong suggesting evidence that Penumbra didn't do that, but they were very quiet about it at first. They communicated with delay and in a way that to us looks incredibly misleading, probably in a way that is not fit for a company that's in the healthcare space. So on July 27, 1 month after the letter sent by the Japanese distributor that you saw before, Penumbra finally sent its own warning to the medical community, basically telling them to be careful with the new device and not to inject contrast catheter. They mentioned the risk of death, but they did not mention specifically the number of deaths that happened. We believe this communication, first of all, happened late. The product was launched in July 2019, but the notice was issued on July 27, 2020, so over a year after the launch. 9 months after the first patient was killed, according to the FDA database that we reviewed, and 5 weeks after the warning sent by the Japanese distributor. So while Penumbra was taking its time in warning the doctors, many more people that could have been alive today have lost their lives or their health because of injuries caused by the device. So we believe that the management delay to issue proper warning may have resulted in avoidable deaths and injuries. The communication was not only late, but was also, in our opinion, incomplete and ineffective. For example, in Japan, the third-party distributor explicitly mentioned the number of deaths that occurred with the device. It described in detail what is it that was killing the patients. And shortly after that, we don't know exactly when, the device was taken off the Japanese market. We presume this was done voluntarily by the distributor, but we don't know. In the US, the letter came late. It mentions only a risk of death, but it never mentioned that actual deaths had actually occurred, and not many, and not the number of injuries, which according to many doctors we spoke to, it's a high number, a high absolute number at least. We understand the device may have failed to reach a large number of surgeons, and if whoever did receive the letter probably misunderstood the importance of the communication, precisely because the communication did not mention that any actual deaths had occurred. This is an opinion from a doctor we spoke with, Mr. Tarek Kashout. And again, we spoke to many, many doctors. We're not going to report every single opinion of theirs because otherwise we'll be here until, for hours. But all of the doctors that we spoke with pretty much agree with what we've been saying. So for example, Dr. Kashout says, quote, "We did not see the notification letter. That's the problem. I heard about it from a journalist. None of my colleagues anywhere that I know in the Chicago area knew about it." So at least this doctor and many of his friends never received the communication. He's talking about a journalist. We believe the journalist is Roddy Boyd, who wrote a good initial piece on this situation. Another doctor at Mount Sinai, quote, "It doesn't seem to be effectively communicated by Penumbra." He's talking about the Jet 7 problems. "People sort of heard of the deaths in the field, and some of that information has been percolating through as a result. I don't know exactly what they're up to, but it seems to me that what they're doing is trying to keep this sort of quiet, at least a little bit." So basically, doctors gossip and and they speak to each other, and by now, like most know that deaths had occurred with that device, but many people ignored or did not receive that letter based on our conversation with doctors. Misleading. This, in our opinion, is one of the most egregious breach of trust that the company has done, allegedly. Penumbra's notice that you saw it before, that notice on the 22nd of July, kind of seems to blame doctors for the accidents, for the deaths and the injuries that occurred, because it kind of says that the doctors haven't been following the instructions for use. In fact, we believe that Penumbra changed the instruction for use of the device approximately at the same time that they sent that letter. And in the original instruction, and we have a lot of proof that we're about to show you, there was no warning against hand injecting contrast media into the catheter, which is what killed those patients. There was a warning not to use high pressure automated machine injections, which is every doctor knows that you're not supposed to do inside that kind of catheter. But if you say that you're not supposed to use it with a machine, that implies that by hand, which is a generally accepted practice, this is perfectly normal and accepted and safe. So this is an extract from the July 27 letter where, and I quote, Penumbra says, "Performing contrast injection through the Jet 7 extra flex is not consistent with the intended use of the device or the instructions for use, which instruct the user to perform contrast injection through another catheter," basically. So they say that injecting the contrast media inside the catheter is inconsistent, and that's not what they meant, and that's not what it says in the instruction. If you have any doubts, Mr. Elsesser, which is the company's CEO, during a recent call to investors, he was talking about this Jet 7 problem, and he said, quote, "As soon as we did our evaluation," and by the way, 9 months passed since they sent that letter, "we made the determination that rather than rely on the user instruction that existed that said, do not do a contrast injection through the catheter, we wanted to make that even more strong, more aware, so that physicians would be notified." So my understanding, and ask yourself what you understand by this statement, is that the guy is saying, well, we said all along not to inject inside the catheter, but to make double sure, we sent a letter to remind and emphasize it. That's what it's trying to say. Is this saying the truth in your opinion? You be the judge. The truth, there was no warning. The company refused to hand out a copy of the Jet 7 Extra Flex when one of our affiliate funds asked about it. Whereas competitors, so Medtronic and all the others, sent their own, no problems, there is nothing secret about it. But we did manage to obtain copies of the original user instructions, and we can say with absolute certainty that it did not warn doctors against hand injecting contrast. It did say don't inject in the high pressure machine, but that implies that by hand is okay. And these are the proofs, ladies and gentlemen. Proof number one, we spoke to several doctors and we obtained original paper copies of the Jet 7 Extra Flex user instruction. You can see a photograph next to the packaging. And this is an enlargement. What does it say? In the warning, it says very clearly, do not use automated high-pressure conscious injection equipment with the device because it can damage it. So again, this implies that by hand, it should be okay. Proof number 2, we searched the internet and there is a smaller version of the user instruction on the internet. And sure enough, if you check about it now, you'll see a very clear warning that says, do not hand inject, which would kind of seem to confirm what the company is saying. But there is a tool called the Wayback Machine that allows you to see old website, and you can see that in the older version of the operating instruction that you can find online, well, sure enough, it's identical to the paper version that says, do not use automated high-pressure conscious injection equipment. Once again, implying that injecting by hand is okay. Proof number 3, maybe the most disturbing proof. In April 2020, so only a few months before that letter was sent by Penumbra, after many people had already died, you can see Dr. Alejandro Piotta, which he published a research paper in a prestigious magazine, where he's basically promoting the ADAPT technique, which is a very efficient way to use the aspiration catheter, including the one by Penumbra. The study explicitly mentions the possibility of a follow-up angiography injecting directly into the aspiration catheter. And I assume he means by hand here. It does not even specify. So again, this study, and you can see right there a screenshot of an extract of the journal, it says, and I read, after confirming the patency of the lumen of the aspiration catheter, follow-up angiography can be then performed with injection of contrast directly into the aspiration catheter. So this is the very same procedure that killed all of those patients. And this doctor, which is very close to Penumbra and is a paid consultant by Penumbra, we'll see in the next slide, was publishing articles as late as April 2020, so right before that notice, saying that it was not only okay, but that he was basically promoting this technique. This is a proof that Mr. Piotta is very close to Penumbra, A, because it said that over the years it received from $400,000 in consulting fees, mostly from Penumbra, more than from any other company. And on the right, you can see that Penumbra, on its Twitter account, occasionally tweets Dr. Piotta's research and conferences because, after we spoke to many doctors, we know that Dr. Piotta is some kind of an evangelist and promoter of Penumbra's products. We don't claim that he did anything wrong personally. He was just doing this job. But we think that this proves that the case that Penumbra tries to advance, that they were telling not to inject the conscious media by hand, is against the design and against the intended use, doesn't hold water here because of this article. Another expert opinion, again from Dr. Tarek Kashout, which is a director of neurosciences at Chicago. Penumbra are trying to blame it on the contrast, which doesn't make any sense because we use contrast always through any catheter. It's very common to use it through the aspiration catheter as well. You cannot give me a catheter and tell me you can't use contrast with it because they're designed for that. So you're saying that injecting stuff through it is inherent in the nature of any catheter. Why we believe this device should be taken off the market. So if it's not clear yet, this is the absolute number of malfunctions as they appear on the mode database. In the case of deaths, we subtracted those that we believe are duplicates. 224 malfunctions in slightly more than a year, 39 injuries, and 15 people lost their lives. That's on an absolute basis. On a relative basis, you can see on the blue is Penumbra's number of malfunction, and on the brown is the malfunction of all the competitors combined that we could identify. And you see 243 versus 21, 39 versus 11, 18 deaths, maybe versus 1 death, but we have doubts about that 1 death. In other words, the device fails, malfunctions, and kills at a much higher rate. Now, Penumbra does have a much higher market share than the competitors combined, but even taking that into account, those numbers show that it's still strongly overrepresented in the statistics. These are screenshots from the FDA. Now, why should it be taken off the market? Well, we believe that the July 27th notice was only partially effective. It is true that we don't see any new dead people from the device from August onward. On the other hand, it seems as though the device keeps malfunctioning. We identify 30 new malfunctions in the months after July 27, and this does not include the month of October, and at least 1 injury. So the device keeps failing, and in some cases, it seems as though it can keep injuring the devices, even though the company has been kind of like ambiguous in its conference call, and they claim that there haven't been any more accidents. To our understanding, there have been plenty of accidents even after the notice. The other very worrying problem is that the number of deaths that we see, and the malfunctions and the injuries, are probably just the tip of the iceberg. Why do we think so? There is misattribution to other causes. So the patient may die and the doctor may think that it's something else that killed it, not the device. Can be a misattribution to other devices. So this kind of surgeries are performed with a combination of different devices. So sometimes it's not clear which is the one that failed. So something that maybe was called by the Jet 7 may be actually be blamed on something else. And many doctors told us that this is the case. When we spoke with them, we highlighted to them that people had died with that device, and all of a sudden they said, oh, actually, I had some sort of accident happening. I was thinking it was another device, but now that you tell me that, it was probably the Jet 7. This happened on more than one occasion. There is a reporting bias because very often the doctors don't want to report unless they're absolutely sure, maybe not to ruin their relationship with Penumbra, which is usually very generous with consulting fees and stuff. There is delays in data entry, so sometimes an accident is entered only months after it occurs. And there is a president of a company called Guidant, whose product was recalled a few years ago. And when the FDA actually made an investigation, it saw that the number of actual accidents that happened with the device was as much as 10 times higher than the number of accidents the company reported. So they were intentionally not reporting. We're not saying that this is happening necessarily here, but it's definitely a possibility. So the actual number of victims may be much higher, maybe one order of magnitude higher than we see. This is what I mentioned before, Guidant, and that's an article that said that again, out of 2,600 reports of problem, the company had only reported 172. Prior catheter recalls happened even with less injuries and no deaths. So we took here this newspaper article that reports a device called Fetch 2 by Boston Scientific and another one called Shuttle Select. So these two devices were eventually recalled only after 13 and 4 people respectively got injured. And there were no deaths apparently. So the device got taken off the market because it was dangerous. But here we have a company and a product that kills 15 people, only in one country, maybe more elsewhere, injures many more, and the device is still in the market. We asked a few experts, including FDA former experts. What do they say? Well, this is Dr. Kurt Jaeger at Mount Sinai. And first of all, he says, Mount Sinai faculty has put a moratorium on the extra flex on the Jet 7. Quote, we were withdrawing catheter from the body of the patient. It just broke with a clot inside of it. Luckily, we were able to be extremely careful and pull it back out. The same thing happened at another colleague, then happened to me again. To have a catheter break on you like that during a procedure is devastating. Mount Sinai faculty put a moratorium, and we shifted to other catheters. So this person told me that the device broke on him as many as 2 times, and he did only about 25 surgeries with this, with a very, very high 8% failure rate. This is from an FDA consultant who preferred to remain anonymous. Quote, I think they're screwed. I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't an FDA auditor reviewing all the records of Penumbra right now. It wouldn't surprise me if they were doing more work after the notification. Just because a company put a Band-Aid on it doesn't mean that the agency will accept that. He was saying that given all the information that we showed him, it's probably likely the FDA may be working right now toward mandating a recall. This is the opinion of a senior neuroradiologist at a major US hospital. Probability of recall, if everyone was behaving as they should, 100%. It's unfathomable that they'd leave a product like this on the market. What they're doing is trying to fix this, and they will sneak this through for the next 2-3 months, then release a new catheter and pull all the old ones away. So they're just trying to get away with it. This is his opinion. Another FDA consultant, quote, big red flags that the FDA is probably going to be feeling pretty concerned about. So this guy agrees with the other FDA consultant in that it sounds like there are mechanical issues going on, fractures, cause exposed, ballooning in the device. They suggest the device is failing at a consistent location, and it's an immediate red flag. We went and consulted the FDA rules and the criteria for when a recall is in place. And again, directly from the FDA website, quote, if the FDA finds that there is a reasonable probability that a device intended for human use would cause serious adverse health consequences or death, the FDA may issue a cease distribution. So we believe this is the case here with the Jet 7. Well, this has been happening in Penumbra's market. What has been happening inside Penumbra? Do the actions of the insiders confirm that trouble seems to be brewing underneath the surface? First of all, this is a track record of the recent, in the last few years, stock sales of Mr. Adam Elsesser, CEO of Penumbra. And you can see that we basically, every one of those red dots signifies a major sale. And you can see that it's very clear. The Mr. Assessor has been selling stock nonstop, almost exactly following the launch of the Sophia, and probably intensifying that after the launch of the Extra Flex. Obviously, we cannot enter his mind and know why he's failing, but we speculate that he's not as confident as maybe he should be about the prospect for his company. Then we have a tsunami of executives and other senior key staff which are leaving the company or have been leaving the company in the last few months. Mr. Sri Kosaraju, former CFO and president, left. Daniel Davis, chief commercial officers, and all these other very, very senior people, which stayed at the company for many years, in some cases from the very beginning. They all left in the last 12 months or so, and many more senior sales managers and area managers. So what is it that spooked them? For example, the most incredible example is Mr. Sri Kosaraju, presumably stayed at the company for many years and finally got promoted to the second most important position, that of CFO and of president, as early as August 2019. So in November 2019, he resigned as CFO, stayed on as still president until May 2020, and then resigned as president as well to join a nonprofit. So we think it's very interesting that this person, at the peak of his career, leaves and then and joins a nonprofit. We understand that recently he joined another medical device company. We speculate that something may have spooked Mr. Kosaraju, perhaps something that has to do with the problem of the Jet 7 and the direction that the company was taking in response to it. This is a slide from LinkedIn. It shows a 500% recent increase of open legal positions. So it seems as though Penumbra is strengthening its legal team, its internal legal team. Maybe that's something to do with what's happening with the Jet 7. First cracks in financials. These financials do not include the latest quarter because it was recently presented, but the picture is very clear. Competition, quality issues are prominent, and they show up in Penn's financial, even though the company is still growing a little bit. There is a near collapse in cash generation, ballooning working capital and unexplained capex, capital expenses, large quantity discount that result in margin compression and possibly channel stuffing, double-digit contraction in revenue. And again, the recent quarter was stronger, but it was led from the peripheral division, which is the other division, not the neuro, which is the division that Jet 7 belongs to. Again, we show strong recent market share loss, and now it's as low as 57%, we estimate. This is the cash flow generation. The cash flow, until the Jet 7 issue started, used to be slightly cash flow positive. But since then, it generates less and less cash. And lately, it showed a very, very problematic cash flow generation figure. Why is the company not generating cash? Well, the main reason seems to be that receivables and inventories are ballooning. So receivables is how long the company takes to get money from the people it's selling the product to, in this case from distributors. And again, inventory is how much product they have in stock. So it seems as though a lot of the sales growth recently is coming from sales to distributors, which then in themselves have a harder time selling to hospitals, maybe because many of them are not buying because they're scared of the device. This cash shortfall that we highlighted before has been financed recently by a large, more than $100 million dilutive share issue. Obviously, this is unsustainable, and it's long-term detrimental to shareholders' interest. There is a very clear, sharp, and constant accelerating margin compression, gross margin compression, so which suggests that, again, the company is probably struggling and it's doing a lot of price discounts. Revenue growth rate has collapsed. You see that, again, since the problem with the Jet 7 started, there is a marked slowdown, and finally, sales went negative. Part of that may be attributed to COVID, but definitely not most of it, because at least in Europe, so thrombectomies are not elective. So if somebody gets a stroke, he has to go to the hospital. What happens when the bombshell hits? So we think we're contributing in making the public at large, the medical community, and the financial markets aware of the situation. What happens when everybody knows? Well, the situation is not pretty. We believe that if it occurs, a Jet 7 recall is an existential threat for Penumbra. The stroke business accounts to some 41% of Penumbra's revenue, we estimate. The neuro part is 55% of revenue, and all of it we think will be severely impacted if the Jet 7 gets recalled. The peripheral business, the remaining 45%, it's unrelated to the Jet 7, but still it could suffer very sharply because of the brand damage that a scandal like this could create. Warning signs may point to issues within the peripheral division. So the company recently launched another peripheral product, and we saw a very high malfunction rate that kind of should be worrying. And potentially, most of the company's business may be under threat because a healthcare company that shows that may not care so much about patients' health, I think its whole existence is in jeopardy. This is what we were saying before, the Indigo system with Lightning. It's a new device, a nice idea that actually warns the surgeon when the catheter is approaching the blood clot and it should change color. Well, there are as many as 33 reports happening in less than 4 months. This is based on the MOD FDA database. And again, all of these reports say the same, that the light doesn't work, sometimes it doesn't turn on, and the flow is not controlled. So the device is, again, failing at a relatively high rate. This is just an indication. Of course, there is no comparison here, but we wonder whether this is an indication of overall quality control problems at the company. More worryingly, researchers are coming out with papers which are documenting the failures of the Jet 7. For example, you see here this recent paper of the American Society of Neuroradiology, which, by the way, is where we took the photograph that you saw before of the balloon. Again, they blame the Jet 7 or they question the possibility that the Jet 7 is failing on a constant basis under certain circumstances. We also heard by speaking to Mount Sinai neurosurgeon that the Mount Sinai, or at least they themselves, are working on a research paper which will be published very soon, again, documenting the failings of the Jet 7. As we mentioned before, our sources in the field say that it's possible, if not even likely, that many elite US institutions may be already discouraging the use of the device. We already talked about the Mount Sinai, but we heard similar things about Stanford, even the Mayo Clinic and Ascension. And obviously the elephant in the room, we're talking about a possible monster product liability class action lawsuit, which in our opinion may well come if this problem blows out. We believe that Penumbra may have substantial liability exposure because of the deaths and injuries that occurred before July 27. This is because the actual flex catheter has a demonstrated structural flaw that resulted in deaths and injuries. And the original instructions, as we show you, I think without a doubt, do not warn surgeons against hand injecting contrast media, which is what typically resulted in those injuries. It's hard to estimate the liability exposure. It's very hard to do it, but we think it would be very significant. Again, 15 dead people on the MOD database in the US, 39 injuries. Damages per deaths are hard to estimate, but they say that it's usually in the orders of millions. So we put a range from 2 to 10 million per accident. But the real number of victims, as we saw, can be a lot higher because of misattribution and underreporting. So the liability exposure for the whole incident can be in the order of hundreds of millions of dollars, even exceeding $1 billion if punitive damages apply. Penumbra, as it is already, in our opinion, overvalued. It's trading at 14.6 times sales and 249 times EBITDA, so more than many of its competitors, in some cases much more. And this is at a time that the market is not aware of the extent of the problem that we just highlighted. We made a little simple exercise in valuation. We assumed that a Jet 7 recall hits at least 50% of the stroke business, which is conservative, that full legal liabilities, as we saw before, maximum punitive damages do materialize, sales multiples revert to peers median, which that too is conservative, because in our opinion, these companies should be trading at a discount. And brand and sales in non-strokes are unaffected, another very conservative assumption. But even with this conservative assumption, we think that the hit in market cap can be significant. And the company may be trading at less than $2 billion if all of this negative forecasting do materialize, implying a 76% downside. Conclusion, in our opinion, we show that there is possibly a pervasive culture of disregard for patient safety over money, a potentially terminal risk of brand devastation, a looming product liability lawsuit, flagship product, the Jet 7, with a documented record of death, which is facing a likely recall, in our opinion, at least 40% of revenue under direct threat, and intense competition coming online from much stronger competitors. We believe Penumbra is a doomed company, and the price target is 55. Finally, the cat is out of the bag. This presentation obviously is being given as much publicity as possible, but we also sent copy of the presentation and the associated research and reports to the regulators, obviously to the FDA, to elite hospital and stroke centers, to large shareholders, sell-side analysts, patient advocacy groups, and most importantly, we've been speaking with the leading medical malpractice and product liability law firms, which are very, very interested in looking into this, and if relevant, perhaps turning into a lawsuit. This is a warning, we give it all the time. We are a company that focuses on financial research. We're entitled to express our opinion based on evidence and fact, and the company is welcome to respond to this opinion with facts. But we highlight that we've been very aggressive in the past in going after companies that threaten legal action. And we have the resources, the legal talent, the financial capability to go through a protracted legal challenge if necessary. This is what happened in a couple of examples of companies that threaten legal action for us. The executives of those companies are both behind bars. Thank you very much.